An acronym is applicable when a person's name seems amusingly appropriate to their profession or personality. Some examples include Usain Bolt, largely considered to be the fastest man on Earth, or my friend Lily Rose, the florist. Get it? Now, the residents of the nowhere tend to take their namesake very literally, or at least the names we know them by. The teacher, the doctor, the thin man. While these blunt and seemingly unimaginative titles leave us under no illusions about their purpose, the visitors to the nowhere are a different story. So in today's video, we will consider the semantics behind these bold and curiously unusual handles and explore what they could potentially reveal to us about the ending of Little Nightmares 3. This is the pseudonym theory. But first, the obligatory spoiler warning. This video will contain spoilers for Little Nightmares 1, Little Nightmares 2, Very Little Nightmares, the Little Nightmares comics series, the Sounds of Nightmares audio fiction series, and of course, Little Nightmares 3, if we're right about this. And of course, a supermassive shout out to It's Just Jord, a legendary Little Nightmares content creator without whom I would not have considered making this series, and a person to whom I owe a lot of my insights. His channel will be linked in the description to this video, don't forget to check it out before you go. Now with that being said, I'd like to open with something personal that persuaded me to consider this topic in such depth. A question that I get frequently on this channel is, why did you choose the name Gemini? Which is a great question, because as you might have guessed, Gemini is not my real name. But it is also not a reference to the zodiac symbol, or at least not my zodiac symbol, considering my star sign is Cancer, not Gemini. You may have noticed prevailing themes of duality throughout my channel, with consistent contrasts of black and white, red and blue, fire and ice, good and evil, and they're all very intentional. I have schizophrenia, a condition which can be and is managed to reasonable effect by medication. A condition which has me hallucinate. Hallucinations which, amongst other things, will manifest as an entity that will constantly talk to me, whispering to me, questioning me, warning me. An entity which I have come to embrace and accept as a part of who I am, adopting it as almost a defense mechanism. Think of it like an imaginary friend, a constant companion and a reflection of my innermost emotions. I chose the name Gemini because we are a package deal. There's always two of us, and we are never apart. But let's get back on topic. The point being, my choice of name does have significant, aptly descriptive meaning. You just have to recognize the signs. Which got me thinking, if my name can reveal so much about my character and circumstances, then what do the visitors' names say about them? And what, if anything, can we learn about these characters by exploring this topic from an onomastic perspective? Let's start with one that I know has been explored in detail before by other notable creators. Our Little Nightmares poster child, Six. Six's curious nowhere name is one of the oldest and most interesting mysteries in the Little Nightmares universe. It can of course be interpreted in a number of ways, but with an unfortunately limited amount of evidence with which to substantiate them. In early works, such as the Little Nightmares 2017 comics, we follow the story of Six as she traverses the moor and happens across 5 other children who proceed to regale us with tales of their individual experiences within the nowhere. These children have been dubbed by the fandom as numbers 1 through 5. And so, although their names are not officially published by the developers in any way, it does stand to reason that the early days of Little Nightmares, having only introduced us to these surviving characters outside of their own stories, could explain the children she meets referring to her as Six. Some notes that I have that I think might help support this theory are that none of these characters use each other's names in their albeit brief conversations, and Six doesn't communicate at all with anyone. So even if their names aren't 1 through 5, they might still just call her 6, being that she's the 6th member of their little group. Also, in more modern lore, the sounds of nightmares gives us examples of the nowhere affecting the memories of its visitors, such as in episode 2, A Penance at the Bathhouse, where Noon recalls meeting a boy named Jester who likes to tell jokes, but doesn't remember the punchline to any of them. And more to the point, Jester himself specifically states, "Other kids call me Jester because I never run out of jokes," indicating that Jester is not his real name either. And one more piece of early lore to back this up is that there's a particular panel in the 2017 comics where what appears to be the bread boy is talking to Six through a set of bars. He asks her, "What is the last thing you remember?" And he receives no response. But she follows up by saying, "If you don't tell us, you're sure to forget altogether." Could it be that the longer the visitors spend in the nowhere, the more of themselves they lose to it? Which is why none of them seem to know their own names. In a since deleted tweet or X post that I can't seem to find for love nor money, even the developers themselves stated that you can't trust the recounts of the children, referring to them as something along the lines of unreliable narrators. Other interpretations of Six's name also use existing lore, but offer a little less substance due to the substantiating evidence also being entirely theoretical. For example, the time loop theory. If Mono is caught in a loop and running through the same cycle over and over again, then our little yellow anti-heroine could simply be the 6th occurrence, being named such due to the game we go on to play through just happening to be the 6th cycle the loop has gone through by the time we are introduced to the character. Which is also supposedly supported by the fact that we can see the number 6 carved into the Thin Man's door at the end of the hall. Or at least this is accepted by a lot of people, but I personally have never seen it. Let me know what you guys think. Am I just being blind? I don't see a number 6 here. But I digress. The next interpretation of why our hungry heroine is named 6 is once again a theory. However, it is not my theory. But I found it interesting and I'd like to read it for you guys. Now, I'll be reading this from the Little Nightmares wiki, but I would still like to credit Spill from Spill the Theories, who created a video exploring this theory 3 years ago. And the wiki doesn't credit who originally came up with this theory, so I figured I'd mention them both and proceed to reading because I think this has merit conducive to this video. Quote, "It is highly implied that a cycle of successors exists in which the various ladies throughout the years have been defeated and replaced by young girls after they obtain the former ladies' powers for themselves, as seen during the end of Little Nightmares when 6 absorbs the lady's essence along with her powers. Other child successors are speculated to have donned a yellow raincoat, as it is seen within numerous portraits and pictures throughout the mall. With 6 having obtained the lady's powers for herself, it is speculated she would have now been set to become the 6th lady had she stayed within the mall. However, due to the ending of Little Nightmares, it is currently unknown if 6's fate is to remain within the mall, or if the cycle ends with her as a result of her decision to leave the mall entirely, dooming it to die as it requires the lady's power to keep its engine alive and running. A portrait depicting the Lady of Little Nightmares, along with 4 other geishas, leaves speculation that the Lady 6 and the runaway kid encountered was the 5th lady within the mall. This would mean that 6's succession would have made her the 6th lady, and possibly to what her name 6 derives from. And finally, a quick theory that came up in a recent live stream, where one of my viewers, Tomato Man, speculated that the sounds of nightmares could hint at 6's name. Also, in that our main subject, Ruth, otherwise known as Noon, is referenced as patient 1224 by Otto the counsellor. It is a possibility that at some point or another 6 was one of his patients, making her patient number 6. Furthermore, if this is in fact the case, the fact that 6 doesn't speak in the 2017 comics could indicate that she refused to speak to Otto either, even going so far as to not respond to or even using her own name, leading to him referring to her by her patient number, 6. So, there's a good few things to consider about Little Nightmare's most recognisable character. My apologies that her section was quite long, but seeing as 6 has the most screen time, page time, and involvement throughout the entirety of the franchise collectively so far, naturally she has the most lore to consider, especially when theorising on her name. But we are going to move on, and here is where things are going to get a little more complicated. Because with 6's name being in numerical value, there's actually very little to decode about her name, other than what we can associate with her from a lens of apt naming. But I believe that the other characters in this list have just as many mysteries to reveal. So let's move on to Mono, the boy in the paper bag. At first, if we simply consider the name Mono on the surface level, it seems to fit thematically with 6's name. Mono stems from the Greek monos, meaning alone, singular, or one, which circles back to the numerical theme, but with a slight twist. But that's too easy. Not entirely implausible, but I promised you more complexity. I said that we were going to explore the semantics of these names, so I decided to consider Mono further, from onomastics to etymology. And this is where some revelations can be found once we dig a little deeper. Let me explain. You may remember at the start of this video I stated that an aptronym is applied when a person's name coincides humorously with their profession or personality. Well, the name Mono is rich with meaning, both as an aptronym, a name that fits a person's nature, and as a cryptonym, a name that hides deeper significance. Let's break it down, starting with character reflective meanings, literal and symbolic. Consider monotony and repetition. In a broader sense, mono can be linked to monotony, implying someone stuck in cycles, repetitive patterns, or an unchanging state. Or simplicity and uniformity. The prefix mono is used to indicate singularity in concepts like monochrome, being one colour. Mono's palette seems to consist of monochromatic colours. Another example would be monolith, meaning one large structure, which given the game's setting, I think speaks for itself. A person named Mono might be perceived as straightforward, unchanging, or even stark in their personality or worldview. Mono's character description, as written by the developers, characterises our bag-wearing hero as an uncommonly single-minded child. When he sets himself to a task, he rarely gives up before it's completed. Authority and absoluteness. Words like monarchy, meaning one ruler, and monotheism, meaning one god, carry connotations of dominance, singular control, or an individual who embodies the entirety of something, much like the Thin Man seems to represent through his manipulation of the Pale City and its citizens. Now, as well as nominative meanings, which are more literal and symbolic, let's go further and consider some cryptonymic meanings which cover more hidden and thematic traits, such as a sole survivor or the last of something. Mono could be the name given to someone who remains after others have disappeared, reinforcing a theme of loneliness, trauma, or singular purpose. A fragment of a whole. If mono represents one, it could imply he was once a part of something greater, but is now incomplete, seeking to reunite with something lost. A being beyond connection. If his name defines him as one and only one, he might be unable or unwilling to form bonds, doomed to walk his path alone. It could be implied by his name that Mono is struggling against an imposed role, someone who is defined by their solitude but longs for connection. A representation of the viewer. That's you guys. In some narratives, the character named Mono might symbolize the self, especially a self that is detached, an observer rather than a participant. which would fit the gameplay narrative, seeing that these characters are likely intentionally ambiguous, so that we, the players, can see our own personalities reflected in the characters we control in the game, and therefore find them all the more relatable. If Mono were you, in some metaphorical sense, the name might capture the feeling of separation from others, a representation of being unable to truly integrate with the world. And lastly, what if Mono is a title rather than a name? Maybe Mono is what he became, not what he was born as, implying a transformation or a loss. Some very curious links indeed between our little paper bag boy's seemingly simplistic denomination and his role within the nowhere. Much of which, if considered early on, could silently foreshadow the general theme of the character, but much of his story, including how it ends. Which brings me to the final part of this video, and the segment that a lot of you have most likely been looking forward to the most. But first, I'd just like to thank you for sticking with me so far into my lengthy explanation, and would like to kindly ask that if you are enjoying the video so far, please let me know by using the thumb buttons down below, preferably the upward facing one. And once you've heard what I have to say, voice your opinions in the comments section below, and let me know if you think I'm onto something here, or if my desperate attempts to understand the inner workings of the nowhere have rendered me delusional. Now, let's take a closer look at our new heroes, Lo and Alone. Like Six, Alone's name seems to leave little up to interpretation, its bluntness pushing us to speculate on its more literal and surface level meaning. That obviously being the theme of isolation, which in itself is a curious choice, given that Alone seems to be the one thing she's not, at least from all of the illustrations of her revealed to us so far. Always accompanied by her best friend and constant companion, a boy with an equally obscure name, Lo. Now, if we're considering these characters' names from every conceivable angle, then we must contemplate that her name may be a label rather than something she chose. The implication being that Alone is something she's supposed to be, but isn't. Perhaps her connection with Lo is her way of challenging her negative moniker in favour of representing its exact opposite. This does, however, lead me to speculate that her bold and paradoxical namesake is more of a framing device, foreshadowing a future which is yet to be. Could it hint at an eventual separation? If she's always been with Lo, but her name is Alone, maybe there's an inevitable point where she'll have to face true solitude. Both Six's and Mono's names could be interpreted this way, and if certain aspects of the law are as they appear, then both of their names represented something they became, rather than something they are. But then, what of our final pint-sized protagonist? The name Lo certainly has a literal meaning, but when considering its significance as an aptly descriptive name and studying Lo more closely from an onomastic perspective, it still doesn't answer too much about what this character is or what he is yet to become, unless we take that very concept and apply it not only to the individual characters, but the text used to describe both them and the situation they find themselves in. So, think about this. Both characters are on a shared journey, guiding and aiding each other towards a mutual goal, a mythical place where they believe they will find a gateway leading home. You see, everyone we've met throughout the series so far have been trapped in the nowhere, a place which seems as complicated to enter as it is to escape. So let's break that down. Seldom do we hear of people accessing the nowhere, as the focus tends to be largely on escaping from the horrors that lurk within it. But somebody who does is Otto the Counsellor, who makes several references to his desire to access the nowhere, characterising the act of doing so as sinking lower.
If only I could sink lower and lower.
Further expressed in his final conversation with the ferryman in chapter 6, when we hear the creature's distorted voice state,
"Sink into these tideless waters. A toe dipped, but to plunge you must be pushed."
The new comic series, which also further hints at exploration of this topic, is literally named Descent to Nowhere. The tagline for which, as published by the developers, is "Prepare yourselves, children. The only way through is down." So, cross-referencing these terms with our bow-toting traveller and using the existing themes of character names foreshadowing their fates, we could conclude that the ending of Little Nightmares 3 could go a little something like this. After traversing the spiral, following Lo's lead to the referenced mythical place, using what could be a map, a set of instructions, or a series of clues, our heroes finally find their trans-dimensional gateway. However, for one reason or another, only one of them can use it. Now, it could be that they're being pursued by a dastardly denizen of the nowhere at the point of locating this particular portal, and only one of them makes it. It could be that Lo possesses an artifact that allows him safe passage, but not alone. Perhaps, in a thoughtful act of heroism, he passes this artifact to Alone and shoves her through the portal. Or it could just be that the rules are that simple, that your journey through the nowhere is one that you're supposed to face alone. The fact that Alone is essentially tagging along Lo's journey may be enough to deny one of them passage. Whatever the case, the result would be the same. Alone would pass through the gateway, leaving the nowhere and leaving her alone on the other side without her best friend. Lo would be denied passage, leaving him trapped in the nowhere on the opposite side of the threshold with no choice but to descend, to plunge, to sink deeper, therefore making him Lo. Their names aren't just ironic or symbolic, but prophetic. Instead of representing their current states, their names foreshadow what they are destined to become. Alone was never alone until she was. She escapes the nowhere, but at the cost of losing Lo, fulfilling the name she carried all along. Lo was never Lo in the emotional or physical sense until he was forced to stay behind. With Alone gone, he has no choice but to sink deeper, fulfilling his own name. This interpretation gives their names a tragic weight. What once seemed paradoxical becomes inevitable. It also adds tension to their journey. If they begin to realise what their names truly mean, then every step closer to escape carries an undercurrent of dread. We may once again experience delayed realisation. Maybe Alone and Lo don't recognise the significance of their names until the final choice is forced upon them. Much like we didn't realise the significance of mono and sixes in the earlier games. But there you have it, guys, my thoughts and speculations on what these characters' names say about them, and my predictions on how I believe Little Nightmares 3 is going to chew up our souls in a fashion true to its namesake. Of course, I would love to know what you guys thought of this theory, and you should feel free to let me know in the comments below. Do you have any predictions? Was there something I missed when contemplating this theory? As always, I will be reading all of your comments and taking each and every one of them into consideration, and I'm excited to share some of my upcoming works that I think you're all going to enjoy. So make sure you ring that little notification bell so that you don't miss it, because they may be sooner than you think. But until then, little ones, that's game over. Bye.